keep it.
Now you talk, Zoe. Now you talk.
Oh, thank you for having me, Anna.
Sure, Zoe. Hi there, Ana Cortez with Oracle Speak, and we have a guest today. It's a very exciting show, something different for the listeners. I'm so pleased and honored to be here with Zoe 7 of Zoe7.com. Zoe is the author of Into the Void and Back from the Void, and there'll be a third book coming out, he tells me, a trilogy series. And these books explore altered states of consciousness. Zoe 7 has been involved in this area, which has become so popular now, decades ago. He was really on the cutting edge, and still is on the cutting edge of what's happening with altered states of consciousness. So we're going to talk about a few different areas of research that Zoe is doing. But Zoe, just maybe define for our listeners what we mean when we say altered states of consciousness.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Anna.
Oh, sure.
Honored to be here at your program. Altered states of consciousness or modified states of consciousness is something that's dear to my heart. I didn't start experimenting with these states until my 30s. Some people, in their late teens or their early 20s begin experimenting with various methods, substances, plants, devices, and what have you to achieve these altered states of consciousness. The main one that's of great interest to me is what is known as lucid dreaming, astral projection, and out-of-body experiences. I think that's, as far as I'm concerned, the holy grail of these states. Sure, of course, ayahuasca use has become very popular over the past, 10 years or so in mainstream, consciousness. And throughout history, these states have been engaged in and have been experimented with and researched by various individuals, beginning with the shamanic traditions all the way to more modern neuroscience research.
And I lost and where were we going with that? So people are experimenting with it. They love ayahuasca now. There's a really hot topic. But you're saying, which surprised me when you were talking, you're saying that lucid dreaming and
or astral projection, out-of-body experiences,
is the holy grail of altered states of consciousness.
Well, you see,
we're not even taking a substance when you're talking about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because our own bodies, our brains, are probably the biggest pharmacological factories in the world, or perhaps even in the universe. We have neurochemicals that are very similar to the illegal stuff that's out there. Stuff like LSD or DMT experiences, and it's interesting how nature created the human brain with specific neuroreceptors that intake these molecular structures. It's similar to like a lock and key combination. If you don't have the right key for the lock, then you're not going to be able to open it. And it's the same thing with these substances available in, for example, plants. And which again, like I mentioned earlier, ayahuasca, which is a combination of two plants that make up this potion, and when you intake it, or any human being intakes it, is able to transcend their everyday 5 sense reality and go into these alternate realms of experience, of being, of existence, perhaps. I mean, in the shamanic tradition, one of the names of ayahuasca is the divine of the soul, or divine of the dead, because supposedly you're able to communicate with, people that have gone to the other side, ancestors, spirit guides, non-physical, non-corporal entities or beings. And but the same thing happens without the intake of these substances in naturally occurring uh, psychedelic states, if you will. Uh, for example, I remember when I was a kid, I had this intense fever that lasted, a couple of days, and I was hallucinating in hindsight, and obviously, I was a little kid. I'd never taken any, drugs at the time, and but for all intents and purposes, I was quote unquote tripping. You know, so this was curious to me that us humans, we have this ability to engage these states, and as I became more mature and began to investigate this from a more experiential perspective, I came across different plants, different chemicals, and I understood that perhaps this is an aspect of the human experience that, for some reason or another, in modern society, has been excluded in favor of, a state of consciousness. What I mean to say is from being asleep, in between asleep and awakening, and nothing in between. We wake up, we
Right.
go
We're
through our day,
logical.
yeah, and then we go back to sleep, and nothing in between. Whereas there's other different dimensions or layers of experience that are available, and that they exist. But then of course, there's the two types of people. You have the people that don't believe in anything other than what they see and they can touch,
Right.
and then you have the people that are able to go into, trance states, or maybe some people may call them mystical states, and communicate with other aspects of either themselves or of the universe, and get back logical and concise information about whatever topic it is that they are researching at the time.
So Zoe, this is a topic so close to my heart. I remember having an experience in college after reading a Carlos Castaneda book and having a long and intense conversation with my friend about it, where we both went into an altered state. This was before I had tried any sort of altered state kind of medicinals. And then later in college, when I did a little bit of experimentation, I figured out it was the same experience. Like, those substances are designed to bring you to those states of consciousness that we're able to achieve naturally. And that just blew my mind because no one had ever presented it to me that way. I just thought drugs were to mess you up, and if you were responsible, you were going to stay straight. But this conversation is about the human being having a much greater potential to tap into something. But how do we tap into it? How does the average person start to incorporate these altered states?
Well, one of
And
the
why do we want to?
right, sure.
What's the goal besides,
Well, obviously it's not to trip. I mean, before you can access any of these states, you have to have some sort of discipline, so you can undertake, the practice of meditation to be able to relax properly. Eventually, what you want to be able to accomplish, and this is to borrow Robert Monroe's terminology, Robert Monroe being a author and explorer. One of his books is Journeys Out of the Body. But it's to achieve a state called mind, or that he called mind awake, body asleep. And from there, you are basically going into an aware state of sleep paralysis. And right after sleep paralysis, you can go into a dream, and into a dream state in full awareness. That's what I call the holy grail of all experiences, because in fact, some of these experiments that have been done with lucid dreaming, and you can do your own Google search on them, but healing from the lucid dreaming state, where people are able to heal themselves or to be healed from some type of psychological or physical ailment. And this is similar to the placebo effect, where the person is given some pill that they are told is some super drug that's going to cure them of their,
Right.
cancer or
Right.
whatever illness they have, and they believe this to be so. And this is in medical literature. They get healed, they get cured, but they did not take any drug. They just it's usually a water pill or a sugar pill. And I've experimented, in fact, with taking a dream tab of LSD and a dream tea of psilocybin mushrooms, and you have a full-blown experience, psychedelic experience, but you're not intaking the actual drug. But when you're in a lucid dream, you're accessing your subconscious, and you are made to believe that like what I do, for example, is I reach into my pocket, thinking, expecting that I'm going to find a little tab that's going to be super LSD, and I'm take it, and I have a full blown LSD experience.
But let me ask you something, Zoe, because what percentage of people do you think have really had lucid dreams, and what's the difference between a lucid dream and a vivid dream?
Well, first of all, in a vivid dream, which obviously it's a great to have, because that means that you are remembering. Because in the morning, you see, everyone has dreams every night. It's just that most people in our society, for whatever reason, maybe it's something in the environment, maybe something in the food supply, who knows, are not able to remember their dreams. If we're lucky, if we would remember a little, snippet, of one dream throughout the night.
Right.
But every 90 minutes, we go on a rapid eye movement sleep stage, or REM sleep stage, which is a dreaming state. And throughout, as the night progresses, they become longer and longer every 90 minutes. Whereas the last 2 hours of an 8 hour sleep cycle, the last 2 hours are almost full REM sleep. So a vivid dream is just, it's so vivid because you remember it so clearly, whereas a lucid dream is when you become aware within the dream that you're dreaming. And for all intents and purposes, it's like you are in an alternate reality, and it's a reality just as real as the physical reality, three-dimensional. You have access to all your senses, hearing, touch, taste, feel.
So just for our listeners, I want to clarify here. So you're saying that just the fact that you know you're in a dream
It's a
changes everything.
Well, it can change the dream, if you know how to manipulate it once that you've become lucid in the dream. But it's a different type. If anything, the person that has been able to achieve this has achieved a higher level of functioning. So insofar as consciousness is concerned, because uh, it's the same as in people. If you think about it, in their everyday life, it's almost like we're robots. We do things without being aware that we're doing them. Many times, I've you know thought to myself, wow, I mean, I left work and I'm at work, half-hour drive. I didn't even know how I got here.
Right.
I
Right.
wasn't aware. Or we have like pre-programmed conditioned responses to certain things, in which we respond without even thinking why.
Sure.
So it's because we're not aware of this. Yet when you start practicing lucid dreaming, then you become aware in the dream, and then that also tends to translate to the physical reality. So you become more aware in physical reality of whatever it is that you are experiencing, or how it is that you're reacting to certain things or in certain situations. And if anything, you become more mindful.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome, because I think a lot of people have practices in mindfulness and are using different methods to bring mindfulness into their daily life, but it seems to me like lucid dreaming is less popular, say, than maybe meditation or yoga or I don't know, some of the other maybe practices, but you're saying that lucid dreaming can help you be more mindful in the awake state.
And yeah, not only that, but I think it can help you tap into inner resources, inner powers, if you will, that you have, that perhaps we all have, but we, make no use of them because first we're unaware of them, and also because we've been conditioned to think that physical, what's physical, it's real, and what's non-physical or in the mind, it's not. And I'm of the belief that what's in the mind is more real than physical, because if you think about it, everything in our physical world has come from the mind. This chair that I'm sitting on and this table in front of us, was at some time in somebody's head and eventually became a physical object, but it all spawned from the mind.
So you're saying, you said the word superpowers, if I'm remembering correctly. So do you think it's superpowers? You're talking about superpowers in a dream, but do you think those superpowers can translate from the practice of lucid dreaming into our everyday life?
Well, yeah, for example, I think it's a superpower to be able to heal oneself of some, ailment that you're not having any luck with physical medicines, and you go into a lucid dream and you go to a dream doctor and you drink a dream potion, and then you wake up and you're no longer with that ailment. I think that's pretty incredible, pretty super. And there's been many recorded instances of people that have been able to have a dream of the future. And isn't that cool? That you can time travel to the future and come back, write it down in your dream diary, and then a few days or weeks or whatever, that dream comes true. How does that work? How can the future exist if it hasn't happened yet? But again, I think that these are all avenues that we have available to us as humans, but we have forgotten, that we can achieve them, that we have them, that they're available for us. And again, through altered states of consciousness, like lucid dreaming, we're able to tap into these.
That's very interesting. Zoe, I happen to know a little bit about your personal background, and I know that of all things, the Ouija board was a huge influence on you and sort of set you on this path that you're on now. Can you talk a little bit about that? The Ouija board is like sold in Walmart, right?
Right, but at the same time, it has this incredible amount, has had a tremendous amount of negative publicity associated with it, mostly to scare almost, people from ever engaging in it. Because for whatever reason they'll say only demons will come through the board and overtake your soul.
I think that was a pretty good deterrent, because I think most people think of the Ouija board that way, and if you bring up, or when I've heard the Ouija board brought up, everybody says, "Oh, but you got to be so careful. You can channel through, a demon." And you were like that movie, The Exorcist, Didn't
supposedly,
Linda
right?
Blair get possessed or something? Because
well, there was
of the
also
Ouija board?
a movie with Tawny Katane, very popular in the '80s. I think it was called Witchboard, and it was some about some woman that contacts some spirit through the Ouija board and then ends up murdering people.
Nice.
So all these fear-based reactions that have been conditioned on the general population. And again, I wonder why. We were having a conversation the other night, and you mentioned something interesting about tarot card reading.
Not tarot. Please don't say the word tarot on my show.
Well, card reading. That and you made an interesting analogy. You remember the analogy that you made?
Yeah, saying that when you're reading cards, you're tapping into information beyond your current understanding. You're getting help from somewhere. We don't exactly know where.
But the cards are neutral, correct?
The cards are neutral.
So it's like the Ouija board.
And you're the channel for some kind of other information.
And the Ouija board is the same. It's neutral, like the tarot cards, and it's the information that's being accessed, that's coming from the person or the persons they're in the seance or in the session or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you really, should not be afraid of something that's within yourself.
Very interesting. I had not about it that way until we talked the other day, and I put it together with what I've been doing for a long time, which is card reading.
And I think why it's become so interesting to me, the Ouija board, for example, is because when you begin to have lucid dreaming experiences, and based on, there's like a whole like subculture on the internet, all these forums and all these websites and all these blogs about lucid dreaming. Their current theory is that when you go into your dream state, that you're accessing some part of your subconscious mind that creates these virtual, or rather these physical reality simulations that are very real. It's 3D. Everything is solid, and you can talk to
Right.
people, similar like to the movie Inception. Did you ever watch
Oh, for
it?
sure.
Yeah.
Love
Okay.
that movie.
So, and you're talking to projections, but they're all, people from your subconscious,
Right.
and stuff like this. So, and, from my own experiences, sure, this is the case, but also based on my own Ouija board experiences, I know that there's another realm that you are able to access. Just like with the Ouija board, you're accessing your subconscious. With the lucid dreaming, you're also accessing the subconscious, but it's not real. I don't think of the subconscious as a place, but rather as a corridor that you transverse through, and you could go to different places. You can go to somewhere within you, or within maybe some patient that you're treating, if you are some type of psychic healer, or if you are someone that works, in spiritual counseling, or with psychic information, like a psychic. And you can, like I said, there's been many instances where people are able to dream of the future. That you're accessing something that it's real, and that's beyond just your subconscious.
Right.
So it's like a network of intelligence, if you will, that has information, and there's real intelligent beings, not projections from your subconscious, but independent beings that are able to transmit information. And in one of my books, I talk about my Ouija board experiences. And when I made this contact together with a friend, we not only began to receive information, but also these series of beautiful poems that were given to us letter by letter. And when you sit back and you read these poems, you see that there was an intelligence behind them. It's not, the current theory when it comes to Ouija board is that the Ouija board, how it functions, how, what's behind its mechanism, what's the mechanism behind the Ouija board, that it's supposedly some type of muscle, involuntary or subconscious, unconscious muscle phenomena that makes the planchette in the board move. And for those of you that are not familiar with a Ouija board or a planchette, basically the Ouija board is this board that has the alphabet from A to Z, numbers from 0 to 9, and the words yes or no. And this plastic device with a circle, like a hole in the middle, and people place their fingers lightly, and after some time, it's called a planchette. The planchette starts to move and spell out messages letter by letter, through the Ouija board.
And of course, there are instances. I think a lot of people have played with the Ouija board at some point, and I think a lot of people have had the experience of somebody at the table moving that thing around and
sure, there's some
building discredit,
right? People that fake it.
So I want to hear. How do you know that your original experience wasn't faked? Wasn't the person you were with just being a okay. Maybe he was a poet and he was writing poetry.
It's interesting because after a few sessions, that me and my friend had, we began to tell our friends about it. This is back when I was in my 20s, and we began to tell our friends about it, and they were curious. So they would, asked to be present at some of these sessions to see if we were faking it or we were faking them, And as fate would have it, one night we had a group of 3 friends together with me and my other friend that were the operators of the Ouija board, and it's interesting because we were getting one of the poems, and I'm sure some of our friends were thinking, well, maybe, I wonder if this is real. They're pulling our leg and whatnot. One of the messages that was spelled out was, do not become afraid. And I remember me asking, why would we become afraid of anything? Because we already know that this wasn't like some evil, thing that we were doing
you've
or
been
anything.
working with it for a few days.
For a few weeks, right? And so when I asked, why, and then the messages began to be spelled out. It said because 2 minutes after this message is recorded, lightning is going to strike, and the electricity is going to go off, as a consequence. And I'm paraphrasing here, but don't be afraid because the electricity will return in less than 1 minute. So one of my friends,
and this whole thing was written out letter by letter,
right? And 2 minutes. So 2 minutes from the time that the message was recorded, this was going to happen. So when we finished, obviously recording all this and understanding what it is that was going to happen, supposedly, one of our friends had a watch, and he was the most incredulous of them all. So he had his finger pointing to his watch, and he was like counting the seconds until the 2-minute mark. So right at the 2-minute mark that he points to his watch, trying to say, you see, you're full of crap. So
he was the one that was skeptical.
Yes.
In the group. Yeah.
Well, they were all probably skeptical, but he was the most vocal and more sarcastic of them all. So right when he points to his watch, we saw flashing lights outside the window, and then the rumble, and then boom, electricity went off. So everybody was like, whoa, surprise, what the, we didn't know, we were all surprised. I was in shock because, think about the implications of what just happened. So then my another friend had a lighter. He was a smoker, so he, turned on the lighter and was pointing at the watch, and then right about, I don't know, like in the 52nd second or something, right before the minute, then electricity went back on. So what had happened, if you think about it, is that 3 predictions had come true in sequence. Because how many times? First of all, I'm not aware of anyone being able to predict lightning. Say, okay, well,
right.
at 8:55 a.m. today, lightning is going to start.
If there was a storm outside, it would have been going off.
Right.
Was there a storm
Nothing.
Outside?
No.
There was no previous lightning.
No previous lightning. If it was sprinkling, we weren't aware because it wasn't like hitting the windows or the plants outside. So it wasn't like anything that,
right.
Was that we would notice. But then after the electricity went off, the prediction said that it would come back in, that it would come back in 2 minutes. I'm sorry, that it was 2 minutes until it happened. Then that the electricity was going to go off. How many times is there lightning and electricity goes off?
Right, true. That's true.
That's 50-50.
Yeah.
Maybe or less. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't happen. And how many times it could take maybe a few minutes or a few seconds or a few hours or until the next day to come back.
Right.
But it said no, in less than 1 minute. So that sequence of predictions made me understand that this wasn't something that was coming from muscles, or that obviously our friends understood that we weren't faking them, and most importantly, the poems. There was a genuine intelligence behind this phenomena that we had tapped into for whatever reason. And, I became even more curious about the supernatural and the spirit world. And I, began this, exploration of altered states of consciousness and what have you.
And you have those poems or some of them in your book?
Yeah, they're published in Back from the Void. Soon to be available ebook Kindle edition. You can get them because they're sometimes they're hard to find. They're old books, from like 10 years old. But soon to be available on ebook form. And again, this changed my whole outview on what reality is. It's not what we think it is. It's something much deeper.
And
in that.
so this sort of segues a little bit, Zoe, this conversation about this help from an intelligence. I mean, there was obviously some sort of intelligence in
No, it
the.
actually was a group of intelligences, and they all had different names, and each gave us a
Oh,
poem. That was like
oh,
their
wow.
introductory
So do you
card.
think those were people who, or entities that had previously been
Yeah,
people?
we,
Was
we
this
we
the
asked them.
afterlife?
Well, actually, well, I mean, I get into this in detail in the book, but according to what we're told, they were me and my friend Freddie were part of a soul, an oversoul, if you will, and that they were us in the future, and they were communicating with their past, so that a particular connection or like a psychic connection had to be made, and it's almost like a feedback loop. It's
Wow.
something that had to occur so that we could be in the same timeline.
And you were how old when this happened?
I was in my, late 20s. This is like
And
in
you
1989. We're talking about, I don't know how many years ago, 20s,
and you hadn't been
something years
studying.
ago.
You had not been studying the occult or the
I had it
supernatural, or
was
yes?
yeah, it was starting to tap me in the shoulder. I had read a book, I remember, by a psychologist called Brian Weiss, called Many Lives, Many
Oh, I've
Masters.
read that book. That's a great book.
So and I had began reading another book by Seth and Jane Roberts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Seth Speaks, I think it was called. Yeah. And so those two books, it was again, it's like I was being, something was tapping me in my shoulder, saying, "Listen, pay attention to this, because this is going to be part of your life," which became my research and my books. And I'm here in Brazil as a result of all this research and all these studies and all these experiences.
Wow. So do you want to talk for a minute about what are you doing here in Brazil? What's your work here in Brazil? And
Yeah, I left the U.S. back in the year 2002, I think it was, and I was invited uh, to a retreat in the Amazon jungle here in Brazil. I remember it was Alex Gray, who's a visionary artist, myself, and I think we were the only two speakers. Oh, and Luis Eduardo Luna was also involved in that retreat. So I was invited to this retreat as a speaker. At the time, I had spoken at Mind States 2 in Berkeley, California. I believe there's somebody made an MP3 of that talk, or part of that talk is, it was parts of it didn't come out or whatever. But so I went there to speak. I was invited as a result of having self-published my first book, Into the Void, which deals with also consciousness exploration and altered states of consciousness and stuff like this. And from there, I was invited to this Brazilian Amazon retreat, and I had my first experience with ayahuasca. And shortly thereafter, I began to experiment heavily with Salvia divinorum, which is another psychoactive plant. And I like these psychoactive species because, they go right, their molecules go right for the neuroreceptors in humans. I think that there's some type of communication that takes place when this happens with the spirit of the plant and with the soul of the human being. And these seemingly magical experiences occur, very profound experiences. And I began to give talks and workshops at these type of retreats here in the Brazilian Amazon. And eventually the psychologist that hired me to do these talks moved the retreats to the state of Bahia here in Brazil. And this is where my life's work now. I instruct people in lucid dreaming, spiritual type practices, meditation, uh, communication with inner aspects of the real you, which I believe is the soul, the higher self. And this is what how I came into lucid dreaming, incidentally, as well. My passion, because sure, I had been into lucid dreaming, out of body experiences. but it wasn't as popular as it's gotten now. It's all over the internet. Similar to like ayahuasca was a couple of years ago, all over the place, even in TV series in the United States.
And you're still working with the ayahuasca along with all of those other things that you mentioned as
Lucid
well.
dreaming and mind technology.
So that's quite the combination of things to come together. What would you say your strangest or sort of an outstanding experience might be here that you've had for our
with
listeners?
Ayahuasca?
Yeah.
Well, I must
I mean,
say,
you must have come across tons of strange experiences.
Well, obviously there's personal experiences, and there's also experiences that I've facilitated experienses for people. I remember perhaps the most unusual experience. There was this author by the name of David Icke that came to one of the retreats. Of course, I don't lead the retreats. I'm just one of the speakers. And he had come to partake in a retreat and be a speaker, and obviously, drink ayahuasca, which he eventually went on to write about in his book Tales from the Time Loop, and the follow-up, Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion. And I must say, it was the strangest experience that I've ever been privy to and facilitated. I do not facilitate any of the ayahuasca experiences. My partner Sylvia does, but for whatever reason, what happened was that the group that came together with Mr. Icke had gone to town, and he had stayed behind because he was making phone calls, and he couldn't get a hold of the right person or whatever, what have you. So the group came back, and they, as I recall, you had to take a boat from the little village to the jungle where the retreat was happening, and he had lost the boat, that would bring the group. So when he showed up later on in the night, the group had already, taken the potion, and they were being taken care of by Sylvia. So we see, I see this person approaching, and I said, "Oh, that must be David," and he wanted to join the ceremony, but my partner Sylvia told him, he couldn't because everyone had already taken ayahuasca, and it would be better if he doesn't disturb the experience, and he can take part on the next experience, which is usually one day every other day. So the next day, since he wanted to be part of the group experience, he said, well, listen, the next time that the group drinks, they're going to have 2 sessions under ceremonies under their belt, and I don't want to be the odd man out. So would it be possible for you to facilitate a private ceremony for me? And Sylvia was obviously with the group, but I offered. I say, listen, if you want, I can take care of you. It's mostly what I have to, what you have to do is take care of someone. All the work that takes place is between the person, the seeker, the user of the ayahuasca, and their soul, their higher self. I'm there just in case, they need maybe to, go to the bathroom, or if they vomit, I can, hand in a bucket, how that goes,
A glamorous job.
right. So that's all that I was doing. So he takes the ayahuasca, and within, I don't know, an hour, he begins to feel the effects. But then the strangest thing, started to happen. The ceremonies take place in a dark, all the lights are off. It's a dark ceremony room, and we usually have world, music from around the world, soft music, meditative music playing in the background, and the lights in the ceremony room, all of them began to flicker on and off. Immediately, I looked to the light switch, and obviously nobody was there. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell is going on? How can this be? And David, I remember opening his eyes and seeing what was happening. And at one point, he stood up, and immediately, I was in attention because you can lose your balance because you're under the
Right,
influence.
you were taking care of him, and he's
Right.
starting to move around.
All right. So immediately, I'm in attention, and he begins to do these body gestures, and hand gestures, and it was like he was controlling the intensity and the flickering of the light. So, for a second, that didn't make any sense to me, and I began to think, I don't know what to think about this, but let me go to the light switch because this is obviously, disturbing the ceremony. He's supposed to be in a meditative state, not doing these hand
Being
gestures.
God in the middle.
So I go and flick the switch. It's supposedly off, but I mean, I'm experimenting. I flick it the other way, and nothing is happening. So I start flicking it up and down really fast, and nothing. And it's just somehow it's just flickering on its own and interacting with David. So after a few seconds or a few moments of that, we lose power. The entire place, this facility where we're in, loses power. And I know this because even though we're like in the ceremony room and it's supposed to be dark, there's all of a sudden no light, like how we had started the ceremony, but the music, the CD that was playing, stopped playing. And I said, "Whoa, like we blew a fuse or something." So I'm looking around, and he's got his eyes closed, and this other strange thing begins to happen. I can only describe it as him speaking in tongues. And it's not like, how we're having a conversation now, and I'm picking words to convey, an idea.
Yeah.
But when you're reading, you're not thinking, you're just reading what's on the page. It was like if he was reading from a book, because there was no pauses. He was just talking, but in a language that I've never heard. He's a British man, so he has this accent that I had become used to. And all of a sudden, he's not speaking like David Icke. He's speaking like, I don't know, this other being. And so I'm fascinated by this. And then what's really, really strange, and this is why, I think is one of the strangest experiences that I've ever, been privy to, as so far as like supernatural phenomena is concerned, because I started hearing these thumps. This is a wooden table all over, in a circle, all over the ceremony room, and suddenly, right in the middle where he's channeling or he's speaking in tongues, music comes back on, and that's what brings him out of that state where he was channeling or speaking in tongues, and makes him open his eyes. And then at the distance, I saw that the lights in the restaurant turned on, so I knew, okay, the electricity is back on. And since I had been messing with the switch, I guess I left it in the proper off position or whatever position. It's just that what I mean is that no, the light stayed off.
Yeah.
But the music picked up from where it had left off. And that's what was intriguing, because if you've ever had a music system with a CD player, you know that if you turn off the power, when you turn it back on, it resets itself, and you have to play from the beginning.
Right.
Well, it began to play right when it left off, which it's not supposed to be possible, but somehow it was. And if that wasn't, strange enough, at one point, he's back, and he's looking at me, and he's looking around. Again, he's under the influence of ayahuasca, and I'm not. So as he's looking around, he notices something which makes him get up, and immediately, I follow him to make sure that he doesn't lose his balance, or if he does, I'm there to catch him. And he goes to this area where you can see the treetops of the jungle, and he's staring at something, and then I catch it, and then he looks at me and says, "Mate, are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing?" And I say, "Yes." And the thing is that I'm not under the influence, and you are. And what this thing was, the only thing I can describe it as is a unidentified flying object, a UFO. And the interesting thing is that from the place that we were standing in, the faraway treetops, airplanes or little, airplanes would pass by. I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times a night, and they would be about the size of a nail. But this object was the size of like approximately 2 football fields. It was almost like those airplane carriers in the ocean, huge, where airplanes land,
Wow.
And it was like a little floating city,
Wow.
full of lights, just like passing.
Wow.
And we're staring at this, and perhaps they were responsible for the lighting that
Something.
was switching on and off, or him speaking. So I must say, that was the strangest
That's
experience.
pretty weird, Zoe.
And I was under the influence.
Yeah, that's pretty weird. That's amazing.
So these are the kind of things that
story.
happens, when you're engaged in these states, and perhaps I don't know, maybe you're coming in contact with your spiritual guides, with your higher self, who knows, with extraterrestrials, but there's definitely something that is real, that is physical, and that can be seen both in the case of David Icke with under the influence,
right.
and my case without being under the influence. And I also think that it's interesting and important to note that I lost my train of thought. I had it good, and I should have just left it at that. And I tried to add something, and just left my mind.
That's funny.
Actually, you can Google Pablo Amaringo UFO paintings. These UFOs apparently are a common motif associated with ayahuasca experiences, or a common visual that appears because Pablo Amaringo is a shaman, Peruvian ayahuasca shaman, who passed on in 2011, but he left a great body of work, these paintings.
Beautiful paintings.
Yes, you've seen them, right? Beautiful. That he painted from his experiences with ayahuasca.
And he actually came to, you've met Pablo a few times.
Yes, he used to come to the retreats in the Amazon, and was one of the facilitators and speakers, because in fact him and Sylvia sometimes would facilitate a ayahuasca ceremony, and he will call upon the spirit guides and stuff like this during the ceremony. And in some of his paintings you can actually see UFOs, what we would flying saucers,
right?
And right. These would appear in his visions. And apparently this is what happened with David Icke. They appeared in his vision, but again, the interesting thing is that I wasn't under the
right.
influence, and I still saw.
Well, and in thinking of Pablo's paintings, it reminds me of something I read recently about UFOs appearing on radar sometimes, but with the physical eyes, they're not there, even though they can appear on radar, but we don't see them. So maybe being under the influence of something like ayahuasca, where you're in a heightened ability to perceive things that your eyes don't normally see, you could perceive something that's maybe there right next to you right now as you're listening to this podcast.
Right.
And
right.
You don't have the usual antennae to be aware of it.
Right. Hey, maybe they're using some type of an invisibility device effect or something.
Oh, the invisible cloak trick.
Yeah, the old
invisible cloak.
But with the ayahuasca, you're able to see through this
the
cloak. But I don't know, because again, I wasn't under the influence, so that's the.
But you've taken ayahuasca for sure many times.
Yeah, but not during that night.
Yes.
That's the thing, that I'm saying. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that UFO, for all intents and purposes, was 100% real.
Right.
It's not something, from the ayahuasca experience.
And Zoe, speaking of the ayahuasca experience, a very popular topic now, do you think, just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, do you think everybody is suited to take ayahuasca? Who shouldn't take ayahuasca? Who should?
Absolutely not. I don't think it's for everybody. I think that you have to reach a certain level, particular level of spiritual maturity before you can understand and benefit from these types of experiences. because I mean, based on what I have learned over the years of my research in these modified states and these also psychoactive plants, these are similar to amplifiers, psychological amplifiers. So people have this wrong notion, and this is my way of thinking and seeing things. They're on the wrong idea that if they drink, for example, ayahuasca, they're going to have a spiritual experience, or they're going to become enlightened, or whatever it is that they think. It's going to make them a better person, or it's going to change them. And in fact, what I've come to learn is that it only makes you more of what you are. So if you're a little creative, and you engage these states and take these potions, and you become more creative. If you are in a spiritual path, this will increase and become amplified. But if you're into deceiving others or deceiving yourself, you're going to become a better deceiver. If anything, it's not going to change you unless you want to change that aspect of yourself. So it's almost like when you intake these psychoactive plants, species of plants, they don't change you, because then that would mean that they are in some sense judgmental. They're saying, listen, you're bad and I'm going to fix you.
Right, or acting against your own will.
Right. They're going to make you more. They're just going to enhance you.
But everybody's a mixed bag, Zoe. Everybody's a little good and a little screwed up.
Sure, but I know also people that have been, experimenting with these, types of plants, for decades, and they're probably some of the biggest a-holes that I've ever met. So it doesn't seem to have changed them any, So in fact, they become bigger.
But there must be some people who admittedly are a mixed bag. People come with their issues, their
right.
problems,
and it depends
but ayahuasca makes them a better person.
Or no, it depends on their intent. Because I've had a couple of ex-friends who I thought were friends, and they were drinking ayahuasca, and they weren't who they appeared to be. So again, it's a very personal, deep thing. If you want to change something, then chances are you can use these plants as tools, but you have to still do work, inner work on you. You have to become aware,
and you have to want to
change your experience,
be a better person.
Right, have the intention,
or you have to be able to lose certain parts of your personality.
And especially with ayahuasca, you're able to really look deep into yourself if you want to. Because again, if you are into deceiving others or deceiving yourself, and you don't want to change that, or you're not aware of that, first, if it's shown to you, you're going to be afraid and not going to want to look at it, and have a bad experience. This commonly so-called bad trip, or not want to look at that and look at other things, and they'll be shown to you. So it's not like a forced experience,
and it's not an automatic way to enlightenment, is what you're saying.
Right. It's still work. You still have to undertake a lot of thinking, a lot of reading. It's all about self-knowledge. Know thyself, if you will.
So for those who are on a true path of wanting to know themselves,
this is an excellent.
It's excellent.
Yes, excellent for that. But if you just want to, and if you want to experiment, if you're curious, it's also excellent. But I mean, again, ayahuasca, just like the Ouija board or like the tarot cards, is neutral. It's the operator's intent that determines how, or what's going to happen. So ultimately, it all comes from you, and you can access this through these tools. But it's not bad. Ayahuasca is not bad or good, or the Ouija board bad or good, or cards bad or good. It's the operator.
And what there's been a couple of things in the news that I think have scared people, and they've been a big deal, and a couple people have died. Or I know of one story, at least, where somebody died, I think, during a ceremony. What's your commentary on that? I think most people maybe have a grasp that that's
first
not
of all,
the ordinary.
Unlike other plants, the ayahuasca brew, the tea, contains an MAO inhibitor. And therefore, when you're taking certain medications, you're not supposed to intake ayahuasca. So if you're ignorant to this, or the shaman is ignorant to this, or whoever is facilitating your experience, and it gives you the potion, chances are, you can have a very bad experience, end up in the hospital, or in worst case scenario, die, because of a reaction. But
Because
it's
of
not
the reaction to ordinary type medications?
the combination of the
Mm-hmm.
two.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some, supposedly, like when you're going to take a particular pharmaceutical that a doctor is prescribing, he's going to ask you, what are you taking, and
Right.
he's going to know things, so that, because there's sometimes there's contraindications. But getting back to the ayahuasca and the Ouija board and the cards being neutral, ayahuasca, I know this for a fact, is used not only for healing in the Peruvian Amazon, for example, but is also used for sorcery. So it's like electricity. The shaman or the person will direct. You can either, fix yourself something to eat with the electricity, through a stove or oven, or you can electrocute someone.
Right.
So
Right.
again, it's not the electricity that's bad, it's what it's being used for. So it's the same with these other things.
So finding a place that you trust the people to do it, where it's legal, where you can relax,
And when you can, and where you can concentrate on the experience, because a lot of people, and I used to be this way when I first started, it was very romantic to me, the notion that, oh, I'm going to go into the deep Amazon jungle and drink this, mystical, seemingly mystical potion, and with a shaman. And
Sure,
but
it's very romantic.
but then, the practical aspect of it, there's mosquitoes. I've always lived, in the city. I'm a city boy. Well, now I'm a jungle boy, but but so I'm used to different, to comforts, and the humidity. I didn't like the humidity, and you're just worried about, the bugs, and maybe there's snakes around. So you got to be worried about, as opposed to, like, just concentrate and fully immerse and enjoy your experience with, these plants. So I much rather do it in a comfortable place where I know it's safe, where there's people around that I can trust, and friends, or other people that you meet that are on the same spiritual path. I think is not only, better, but it's even can be fun, in quotes. But again, these types of experiences are not recreational at all. I mean, they're very deep, they're very profound, and if anything, they're very serious, because you're coming to know aspects of yourself that you perhaps didn't know were there, or problems that you
Right.
didn't
So
know
you're
you recognized.
You're exposed in front of people that maybe you didn't meet before you came to the
And not only that, but
retreat.
it's really, you're exposed to yourself in a way that you never were before, because you're really coming in contact with your deepest, with your soul.
So obviously, what you were alluding to before about the need to be super honest with yourself, and if you want to deceive yourself, you can always do that. You always have that option, but
Even more so with these psychoactive species of plants. That's what they do. They amplify an aspect of your true self. And then the only good thing about it is that, let's say that you're not aware that you're an a-hole with your friends and with your family, right? Well, this becomes amplified, and I've had many harrowing experiences where I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that, I'm, this way or that way, and I want to change, and I'm able to do this change based on something that's been shown to me, that I've become aware." Because before, again, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we are following conditioned responses, pre-programmed responses, unaware.
Right.
And it's all about awareness.
Right.
Whether it's here in this physical, or in an altered state like ayahuasca, or in our dream states.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, is there anything else before we conclude, Zoe?
Well, I'd like to mention my my website, zoe7.com. You can get my books on Amazon, Into the Void and Back from the Void, soon to be available on ebook or in Kindle form.
And the name of the retreats where you help facilitate here in Brazil? You don't want to mention that?
Yeah.
Okay, we won't mention it. Look up Zoe7.com.
And thank you, Anna. Thanks for having me.
It was such a joy, Zoe. I really enjoyed
I really enjoyed this conversation as well.
Thanks so much.